In one of the driest places on Earth, a basin where it rains maybe 3 inches in an entire year and the summer ground bakes past 120 degrees. Water comes sliding out of a stone channel on its own, cool and clean, moving at a slow walking pace toward a town that, by every rule of that landscape, should not exist. There's no pump, no motor, no power line buried beside it, and no electric bill waiting at the end of the month. And it's been doing this in some form for the better part of 2,500 years. Now look at the thing that delivers it from the air. A line of round pits punched across the desert in a near-perfect row, evenly spaced, marching toward the green fields like the work of some enormous machine. Most people who see that photograph guess sinkholes, or bomb craters, or scars left by a meteor shower. They are none of those things. Every one of those holes was dug by hand, and the truth of what they are, and what we have quietly done to them, is one of the strangest engineering stories on the planet. The water system in that picture survived earthquakes that flattened cities. It survived invasions, the collapse of dynasties, the arrival of new gods and new languages. It outlasted the people who built it by 100 generations. And now, after all of that, it's dying. Fast, across 3 continents, inside the span of a single human lifetime. The reason isn't drought. It's not climate. It's not even neglect exactly. The reason is something we chose on purpose, because it felt like progress. And by the time you understand what we traded it for, the word progress is going to feel like the wrong word entirely. Because here is the uncomfortable part, and it's not ancient history. The water behind your own tap almost certainly comes out of the ground the modern way. Drilled, pumped, hauled to the surface by a motor that runs on power that runs on a monthly bill. Across huge stretches of the American West, the Middle East, India, and northern China, the underground reserves feeding those pumps are dropping year after year, faster than any rain can put back. We are spending water we did not make and cannot quickly replace, and most people only find out when a well that ran fine for 30 years comes up dry one morning. The people in this story were staring at the exact same problem: a climate trying to kill them, water locked deep underground, and no machine on Earth to reach it. They solved it. And then, 3,000 years later, we threw the solution in the trash. Start with the obvious question. If those craters aren't wells, what are they? Because that is the first thing everyone gets wrong. Nobody ever lowered a bucket into those pits to draw water. The water isn't in the pits at all. The water is moving sideways, far below them, through a gently sloping tunnel that can run for miles underground. The holes are just access points, the spots where the diggers hauled the dirt out, let fresh air down to the men working in the dark, and climbed in to make repairs. A line of 50 craters across a valley is really 50 doorways into a single buried river. This is a qanat. In North Africa, they call it a fogara. In Oman, a falaj. In Iran, a kariz. Cross the Pacific, and the Spanish found something nearly identical, feeding the high desert valleys of Peru, where they're called puquios. Different continents, different centuries, different empires. And from the air, all of them leave the exact same fingerprint. That dotted line of holes running off a mountain toward a settlement. Once you know the signature, you start seeing it everywhere, scratched across some of the harshest terrain people have ever tried to live in, and the engineering underneath that simple line is brutal. To build one, a master digger, a mukani, first had to find water, not guess at it, find it, deep inside a slope, by reading the land. Then he sank the first and most important shaft straight down to reach it. This is called the Mother Well, and the deepest one ever recorded, at Gonabad in Iran, drops almost 1,000 feet into the earth, nearly the height of the Eiffel Tower, dug by hand with no machines and no engines 2.5 millennia ago. That single qanat at Gonabad runs over 20 miles. It links more than 400 separate shafts. Building it meant carving the tunnel and lifting millions of cubic feet of rock and soil up to the surface, one basket at a time, and doing it at a slope so precise that the water would flow on its own without ever pooling, stalling, or tearing the tunnel apart. Get the grade wrong by a hair over 20 miles, and the whole thing fails. They got it right with oil lamps and string. And then there's the detail almost nobody mentions. In some sections, they didn't dig down, they dug up. The men would tunnel from the bottom toward a shaft above them. A method grim enough that it earned its own name, roughly translating to the Devil's Dig, working blind beneath tons of unstable ground, trusting a calculation made on the surface that the two ends would meet. It was suffocation, cave-ins, and the constant risk that you'd break through into a shaft that had silently filled with water and drown where you stood. The diggers watched the flame of their lamps for the first sign the air was running out. People died building these, so why did anyone bother? Because the payoff, once it was finished, was almost unfair. Here's the thing the Persians understood about a qanat that we have somehow forgotten. A pumped well is a straw. You jam it into the ground and you suck. And you can suck as hard as your motor allows. Past what the rain puts back, past what the aquifer can spare, all the way down until the ground beneath you is dry and hollow. A qanat cannot do that. It has no motor to do the sucking. It only ever drains the surplus. The water the aquifer is already holding above the level of the tunnel floor. Take more than nature is putting in, and the water simply drops below the tunnel, and the qanat goes quiet until the balance returns. It is incapable of overdrawing the account, which means no collapsing water tables. No ground sinking, because the earth beneath it has been emptied. No salt water creeping in to poison the fresh water once the pressure's gone. The system regulates itself forever, with no one watching it. The Persians had a name for what that produced. They called them eternal springs. And they meant it literally. Water you could hand to your great-great-grandchildren in exactly the state you received it. A civilization built on that does something strange to a map. It puts cities in places that have no business holding cities. After the Persian Empire brought Egypt under its control late in the 6th century BC, the engineers of Darius I ran a qanat out toward the oasis of Karga, tapping deep underground water to feed crops in a place that had barely grown them before. The remnants of that channel still carry water today. And here is the part that reads more like politics than plumbing. That gift of water may be one reason the Egyptians warmed to their foreign ruler at all, and handed Darius, a Persian, the ancient title of Pharaoh. Bring water to a thirsty people, and you don't just feed them, you rule them. The Persian kings knew exactly how valuable that was, and they built an incentive around it that would make a modern economist sit up. Under Achaemenid law, if you constructed a new qanat and brought water to land that had been worthless desert, or even if you just rescued an abandoned one and got it flowing again, the tax you owed the crown was wiped out. Not for a year, not for your lifetime. For 5 generations, your great-great-grandchildren would still be farming that land tax-free off the work you'd done. It set off something close to a gold rush. The Greek historian Polybius, writing around 2,200 years ago, described the result with a kind of awe. People pouring enormous expense and labor into these hidden channels stretching for miles. Until, in his own time, the farmers using the water no longer even knew where it came from. The infrastructure had outlived the memory of who built it. The plateau turned green and stayed green, fed by veins of water nobody could see. But the qanat wasn't just survival. The Persians got clever with it, greedy even, in the best sense. If you have a steady supply of cold underground water in the middle of a furnace, you can do more than drink. You can build a tower over your house, a wind catcher, that scoops the desert breeze and drags it down across the cool air rising off a qanat channel, then pushes that chilled air up into your rooms. Air conditioning. No electricity, no refrigerant, just moving air over moving water. And it traveled with the technology. When this system reached Sicily, the city of Palermo was laced with qanats, and one famous chamber there, the Sirocco room, was kept cool against the brutal Sicilian heat by exactly this trick. A wind tower married to the flow of water in a tunnel beneath the floor. They went further still. Channel that qanat water to a giant insulated dome in winter, freeze it in shallow pools on the cold desert nights, pack it away under feet of mud brick insulation. And you have ice in the desert in summer. They were making and storing ice with no machinery of any kind centuries before anyone dreamed of a refrigerator. The same buried water that grew the crops also chilled the drinks of people living in one of the hottest climates humans have ever settled. Water this valuable creates a new problem, though. Not how to get it, how to share it without people killing each other over it. And the solution they landed on is so elegant it's almost unsettling. They didn't divide the water by volume. They divided it by time. A community would gather around a water master, and in front of him sat a large pot of water with a small bowl floating in it, a bowl with a single tiny hole punched in the bottom. The bowl slowly filled and sank. When it went under, one farmer's turn was over and the next farmer's began. This device, the Fenjin, was the most trusted clock in the region for centuries, an entire economy of survival timed by how long it took a brass cup to drown. In Oman, they did something even stranger, and it is still barely known outside the country. During the day, farmers timed their water shares with the shadow of a sundial, but at night, with no clocks at all, they read the stars. A man would stand at a fixed marker and watch for a specific star to touch the peak of a specific mountain, and the instant it did, the water was switched from one family's field to the next. The whole system of who eats and who goes hungry was governed by constellations sliding over a ridgeline. Even now, that star-reading knowledge survives in only a handful of villages, passed down from father to son, a fading oral tradition that researchers have been racing to record before the last men who understand it are gone. So this is the picture. A water technology so durable it was called eternal. So abundant, it built empires and made ice in the desert. So fair, it was governed by floating bowls and the movement of the stars, spread across the entire ancient world. It even reached China. And what they built there might be the most staggering version of all. In the Turpan Basin, one of the hottest, driest pits in the whole country, the locals carved a qanat network the Chinese themselves rank alongside the Great Wall and the Grand Canal as one of the three great engineering works of their history. They call it the Underground Great Wall. At its height, the Turpan network spanned thousands of miles of hand-dug tunnel in total, more than 1,000 separate channels feeding orchards and vineyards out of bone-dry ground. I said at its height. Here is what's left of it. Of those 1,200 plus channels, only a fraction still carry water today. The rest have gone dry. An underground great wall, thousands of miles of it, falling silent. And that collapse. That is the question this whole story has been circling. How do you kill something that survived 3,000 years of everything history could throw at it? You don't do it with a war. You don't do it with a drought. Those it laughed off. You do it with something that looks, on the surface, like an upgrade. You do it with a pump. In the middle of the 20th century, the diesel and electric pump arrived in the deserts of the Old World, and on paper, it was a miracle. Forget the years of digging, the dead men, the master who reads the slope. Drill a hole, drop in a motor, and pull water out of the ground as fast as you want it, faster than any qanat, on demand, wherever you stood. And in Iran, that machine arrived alongside a policy that knocked out the qanat's other leg. In the early 1960s, a sweeping land reform under the Shah, the centerpiece of what he called the White Revolution, redistributed land away from the large landowners. Those landowners had been the ones who paid for the qanats and, more importantly, paid to maintain them year after year, because a qanat that isn't cleaned and repaired by skilled crews slowly chokes and dies. Strip away the owners, and the new small farmers couldn't afford that upkeep. So the maintenance stopped. The skilled crews dwindled, and the ancient channels began to silt up and fail from simple neglect, right as the pump showed up to make them look obsolete anyway. Here is the trap nobody saw closing. Every one of those new pumped wells was a straw jammed into the same aquifer the qanats depended on, and the pumps could take more than the rain put back. The water table started to fall, and as it fell, it sank below the floors of the gravity tunnels. The qanats didn't just lose their funding, they lost their water, drained out from under them by the very machines that replaced them. The faster everyone pumped, the faster the eternal springs ran dry. Iranian hydrologists now estimate that over the last half-century, roughly half of the country's qanats have been deprived of their water this way. And the cruelest part is that a lot of this can't be undone. When you overdraw an aquifer and the ground dries out, the tiny pores in the soil that once held the water collapse in on themselves. The underground reservoir doesn't just empty, it shrinks. And in many places, that loss is permanent, losing the capacity to ever hold as much water again, even if the rains came back tomorrow. So step back and look at the trade we actually made. We took a system that could not, by its own design, drain the ground beneath us, a system that asked only for maintenance and gave back water forever. And we replaced it with one that delivers more, faster, today, by quietly emptying the savings account of every generation that comes after us. We didn't lose the qanat to ignorance. We outcompeted it on purpose. Because the thing that destroys the future is so much more convenient in the present. The knowledge isn't entirely gone. Oman protects its falaj systems as national heritage. Iran has started passing laws to restrict the deep wells and shield what qanats remain. Engineers studying water scarcity keep circling back to that buried tunnel as the thing we should never have walked away from. A piece of infrastructure that was sustainable not because anyone managed it carefully, but because it was incapable of being anything else. But for most of them, it's already too late. The men who knew how to read the slope are dying out. The aquifers that fed the channels for 3,000 years have dropped beyond reach. And the director of the Qanat Research Center in the Iranian city of Kerman, watching the eternal springs of his country go silent one by one, put it about as plainly as it can be put: that history will never forgive us for what the deep wells have done to our qanats.